Well, friends, the time has come, the war said, and other such things, to again listen to the enthralling story of Jenny Smith. So, when you're ready, Jenny.
Right, the next bit, after the language scheme or with the language scheme, I went and took a qualification in social work and a diploma of applied social studies, which was a 2-year course. Looking through my diaries and notes for that time, I'm surprised I actually passed. I was still visiting and involved in the language scheme for at least the first 3 to 4 months of being on the course. I was still involved with we were running the National Association for Teaching English as a Second Language, and I was helping with conferences in Bournemouth, in Wales, opening it up for tutors to be encouraged to come in and join us, so that we started to put down the litmus stones for how to teach English to people from abroad.
Jenny, you sound as though you're underwater.
Oh dear. Shouldn't be.
You were better at the beginning when you first spoke to us today. I thought it was a bit clearer. I don't know if that helps. No, we lost it all. I've.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but we couldn't just now. Well, I couldn't.
Oh, right. I'll put this near me to see if that helps.
That's better, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
See, I've got this little thing that I bought. Right. I became Tony Benn's membership secretary and then passed on to become his treasurer. So I was fully involved in politics, and at the same time attending the District Labour Party, which was why the Bristol Council Voluntary Service has said, would you go and get, you're a member of the party, would you go and get on that? I can only describe it as probably what the schoolboys get up to, because it was that sort of atmosphere in that meeting. And I think some of the councillors should have grown up, which they didn't. But I used to stand up and talk about attachment of earnings going on people's pay, so that their rent was at least paid to keep the roof over their head for the wives and children to have somewhere to live, and got boo-hooed that they couldn't possibly do it, which they could legally. And sort of all sorts of suggestions coming out of the voluntary field that I was trying to lay into the lap of the councillors of the city at that time. Some of which later on, they must have been listening, some of them, because it happened, but only little bits. I've given a lot of items, by the way, to the Industrial Museum about the language scheme and the time. And I've been recorded by Friends House in London talking about some of my work with the language scheme, but also with gypsies and travellers. I was friendly with Janet Cox, who was actually married to the chief whip of the Labour Party, Michael Cox, who was representative for Bristol South. And she tipped off us Labour women that the union men didn't like the fact that women were getting family allowance paid to them and wanted it taken away and put in their wage packets. So some of us, I rang round a few people, sent messages out to the South West women, and we went to Parliament to lobby. And I told Tony Benn I was coming up. When I got to the door, I don't think the others had done this. I think many of them were going on a lobby, but didn't know how to get into Parliament. You had to have your MP there to take you in. So Tony came out and said to me, look, you know all these women, stand by the gate and tell the staff who can get in and who can't. Well, I didn't know the whole of the South West Labour women. So I stood there and let them go in, and it brought the whole of the Parliament to a halt, because they all went in and they learnt how to put a little message in to say they wanted their MP. And Michael Cox, as the chief whip, was trying to do a 3-line whip, which he was failing to keep all his MPs together for, and was absolutely furious. And in the end, he decided the only way to solve it was to have all us women into his office so that he penned us in so that the vote could go through in Parliament. But it worked. And family allowance to this day is paid to women. Yeah. And there was an article in The Guardian, by the way, where someone mentioned something. And I said about this, and she said that wasn't true. The men weren't doing that. They weren't, but they were. And they didn't get away with it. It caused havoc in Parliament that day. I was still attending lots of meetings at Albert Villa, and I noticed Albert Villa goes on well into the 80s. So at least 10 to 12 years of me being involved in some way or other in that building. Though I had to give up my Urdu classes because they were clashing. And at that time, travellers came back into my life. If you remember, all my life, it's like they walk in and something happens and then they go away. This was Peter Begley, who's a councillor for St George, one of the St George wards. And there had been a Connors family that had bought a bit of land just up off the Kennet and Avon. And the land had a caravan on it because the people down in the cottage by the side of the Kennet and Avon were constantly getting flooded when there was a lot of flooding around. And they were able to just pick up their things and go up the hill and go and live in their caravan. So the land had already been used for accommodation. Mr. Connors wanted his children educated, wanted them in school, wanted them to learn to read and write, which travellers didn't normally get any chance of doing in those days. And I helped Peter about that time to lobby and try, but we couldn't get planning permission confirmed, and they were eventually evicted. But I did have contact with some of the national leaders of the travellers across the country at that time. So it wasn't just him and I trying to fight a case. But one of the things I always said when I went for an interview for the Labour Party to be a councillor was that I believed in travellers' sites, that we helped them put down roots. They might move from site to site, but we were giving them a place to go to. And I always had a nickname. I was One Vote Jenny, because I didn't get elected for wards by one vote time and time and time again because of this thing. But it was quite interesting. I was also, I became one of the conference arrangement committee members for the Labour Party. You can see this. I'm supposed to be taking qualifications with all this happening around me. It's like havoc. And I got onto the conference arrangement committee, and we took positions away from people that had been there for 30 odd years. And in other words, we were the young ones walking in for change, which happens. That's life. You have to put up with that. Must admit, trying to hold them together as a team, which I somehow or other ended up having to do, was difficult because they were very independent women, but we did run 2 successful conferences like it. I was also involved with Stockwood Community Association. I did 1 or 2 of their newsletters at the time and helped with Vivian Bath, who became a councillor for Stockwood. We actually won it for the Labour Party. She, however, was supporting the building of council housing on a place called the Coots, which exists now and is quite a large site of council housing with panoramic views of the city. But I remember standing at the back of a room in Stockwood thinking that she was about to get lynched and making sure I was near enough to her to be able to walk forward and stop anyone attacking her. And that's how people were about housing, and they still are very vociferous. Annie Perry was a friend and she was wonderful. And her son, Robert, and my son, David, were friends. I was also a governor of 2 Stockwood schools by that time and on the PTA of Brislington School because I was keeping an eye on what was going on in the school for my children. And I was also took over Don, I think his name was Don Doling. He used to run the Young Quakers, and sadly he was taken ill and stopped, and I walked in and took over, and we took the Young Quakers to Cheddar, where we told them all off because they took all the glasses out of the lights in the middle of the road, in the rubber things, whatever they're called, which were highly dangerous. And we marched them back and made them put them all back. And I would tell you, in those days, don't ever play Scrabble or anything else like that with young Quakers. The words that came out were not what their mum and dads wanted. And we had fun. As I said, I think I told you, one of the youngsters went into the Compton beam engine and crawled through the chimney under all the water and couldn't go any farther. And they said, well, her shoulders were, slightly too large. They knew exactly how wide they were, the engineers that were cleaning it that day. It was fun, and I got on well with the youngsters. When I went to people like Fred Morehouse's house, they used to yell, come on, cup of tea, Jenny's here, and make the teas ready for me. And I'm still got contact with some of those from the past. So let's get to the Polytechnic course, because that became quite interesting. The things I was supposed to be involved with, specialise in family therapy, social behaviour, sensitivity and social care. And traits and assessment of characteristics seemed to come into it. One of the first sessions was a film of West Indians talking. And we were asked as a room, what were they doing? And people said, we're about to have a fight and this, that and the other. And I said, no, they're having fun. They're having a laugh. And because I'd worked St. Paul's, I knew that. And I think it was useful, not just the lecturers telling them that they were misreading signs, body language, and all the rest of it. But they were also missing out on being able to get close to a community unless you realise that that's what's going on. Mm. I tried to remember the names of the tutor, and I know Bunty Lewin was the person that was in charge of me, but there was a wonderful man from the north east of England calm and good at handing on information. We had an ex-matron of a children's home with us, and she kept attacking him. And in the end, after a bad session, I turned to one of the others. I said, next week it will really blow. And it did. She just couldn't take someone else being authoritarian other than her, which was a shame because it made me worry about the children's home she'd been in charge with in the past. Oh, and one of the students was a nun, and they'd given her the poor area of Avonmouth to be as an area that she worked. And some of us took her aside and did tell her that there were a lot of brothels down there and that she was going to come across things which nuns wouldn't normally come across in any way whatsoever. And she was absolutely appalled when one of the lecturers chatted up one of the students and was then having a relationship. And we were saying, look, you're back in the world of all other human beings. You've got to actually take this. This is what you're being skilled to deal with and to know how to do it humanely and sensibly so it doesn't hurt too many people. We had a speaker from Oxford University that put forward the theory that we should leave all government and management to universities and higher institutions rather than have services locally. I put my oar in on that one. No one else seemed to understand what we were actually being told is that dictatorships were good and that the hierarchy was skilled to run the world. We also had sessions on care proceedings so that we were used to going to sessions about care of children, which was really useful later on when I went on to care committees as a counsellor. And my first placement was Kingswood Schools, which was a detention centre, a closed unit, a training centre, and an assessment centre. And that had the addition of a section that enabled young offenders to learn to look after themselves and survive outside the world. I am told that the Clay brothers had attended the skills centre and been members there. And somebody or other, there was another famous person. I also found out that swimming, I wasn't, I beat the young boys one day at swimming underwater. I'd been a county swimmer, if you remember. And I was taken aside and told I must never do that. So I stopped being good at swimming while I was there. I did about a week into the closed unit. I can only describe it as a sieve. The youngsters had bored holes through all the internal walls. As soon as they were cemented or boarded up or something was done, they had another go. The closed unit was where young child murderers went. And I assume that they still exist today. I used to go and visit them when I was a county councillor all over the country. And it didn't really seem to have any skilling of them for if they ever left, which was sad because you had all these youngsters deciding to pull down the building that they'd been put into and not having anything really constructive done with them, which was a shame. I also did a time with the holding centre. When children were picked up by the courts, they were held in an assessment centre where they were assessed of what skills they had, whether they had reading abilities, whether they showed signs of violence and all the rest of it. And while I was there, there was a young lad that was in for the highest record of escaping from there that they'd ever had. So I said, well, come on, I'm going to go play table tennis with him. And during the table tennis, I started talking to him, and then I said, and you're going to come for a walk with me. And I walked him round the grounds and showed that every single gate was open. And I told him he was going to go, he was being assessed, the report would go to the courts, and what it would say was, if he kept on running away, was that, he was unstable and they couldn't really assess him and all the rest of it. And so the best thing he could do is buckle down, enjoy things. We were getting them climbing ropes up into trees and things, and he was one of the best at doing it. He would have made, if he hadn't done so, the best cat burglar I'd ever come across. But he did stop running away. And after I'd left, about 3 months later, I was told he stopped permanently. And then they took a group of them up into the Welsh mountains. And he not only ran away, but he took all the other children, young men with him. Which to me seemed a bit more natural. The place I was permanently in, I had to sleep over at night and do night duty as well. And chatted to the youngsters, and it was quite interesting. And people were stealing things, and we sat round in the room, and for some unknown reason they started with me, and they said, "Do you think it's Jenny?" And the whole room said no. And I thought, what the hell have I done to communicate to everyone else that I don't steal? Anyway, it got interesting because there was one young lad in there. This was supposed to be preparing them for the outside of the world. And he really loved big cars. And what he would do was go out and steal one. But he got a Bentley, which is massive. He managed to steal a Bentley, drove it a little way till it ran out of petrol, and then kept going back to it to clean it. And by the time the owner found their Bentley, it was in a better condition than it had been before he stole it. And he just wanted to have a big car and be important. Sad, really, isn't it? That this is the way some youngsters. I also was very, very worried about the fact that there were very posh cars that turned up to take some of the youngsters away for a weekend away. They were in the stages of where I was, where they were about to be left back into the community. And I did think that there was some sort of sexual thing about this, being taken up to London to parties and things. So when we had this big exposure that came out about exploitation of youngsters and what was happening by the hierarchy, well, some of them were very posh cars and some of them weren't. I can't say more than that. I went back. After I'd left, I actually did pass. They thought I would be fine with young men and young people that were offenders, so I passed that bit. But I went back about a week later to collect something. And the staff were all outside and they had bikes, loads of bikes, and they were cannibalizing them, taking this off of that and and I thought, what on earth is going on here? How come all these bicycles suddenly, and I couldn't get an explanation from any of the staff of how they'd acquired all these bikes. And I did hope that the youngsters hadn't brought them in. After I'd moved away, and about 2 years later or 3 years later, there was a very big report on Kingswood schools, which effectively recommended it closed down because of some of what was going on in the building. So I went back to lectures, And my second placement was E-District, Bristol, which was St Paul's, Eastern and Central Bristol. So I was expected to do casework, various cases, but also there was a switchboard, which was the main switchboard for all concerns being raised either by staff or being raised by the public. I had Roger Greenland was my mentor, and I passed that. Roger was very, very good at training and teaching, and later he took over the whole of North Avon as the senior social worker in charge there. And I think they got the right person for it. However, one of my clients was down in Gwyn Street, St Paul's. And if you remember, I rode a motorbike at that time. So I went to visit this client, and as I came out, it was raining. So I was there in the street putting on bright orange trousers and a top so that I could ride home on a motorbike and keep dry. And sitting around the street were women just sitting on doorsteps or odd protruding bits. And there was a woman at the top window of one of the houses. I assumed she was keeping a watch for the police to see if they were going to turn up. And she yelled down, strange things go on the streets of St Paul's while I was putting this on. And I yelled back, at least I'm dressing, and the whole road roared. Laughed their heads off. By the way, Gwyn Street allegedly was where the Molotov cocktails for the St Paul's riots were brought into. All right. So I had already had contact with Gwyn Street in the past. I don't think this history ever gets written. We don't really end up with people knowing about what really happens behind closed doors. When I was a county councillor, my duty was to go and visit youngsters in such closed units all over the country. I went into the London ones, I went into the North of England ones. We placed them anywhere, the cheapest, the better, which it should not have been the principle. Is about giving them a comfortable place to be placed in that was going to help them never to go back there again. And I always felt that the system failed. I felt the staff were very militaristic and that the youngsters weren't really getting the education while they were in those units that they ought to have had. So it did do me the world of good as a counsellor, because I then had a different role, but I was going in and checking. It's like children's homes, because I was in a children's home. The children, the staff in Bristol City Council were terrified of me, because I would go into homes and ask questions, and I would write full reports on anything and everything that was going on, whether it was good or whether it was bad. And it was me thinking, I know what it could be like in these homes, but when someone comes to inspect, they make it all look ever so good, wonderful, and then the inspector goes away and it's not quite like that. I don't know what the time is like. Oh, well, it's not bad. When I left and finished the course, there was a job going in shelter. And I thought, well, I'll try for it, because I'd done 6 weeks voluntary work in shelter, so they knew what I was like and hoped I'd get it. And so I was unemployed for about 8 days, because they grabbed me instantly and gave me the job. But the other person who applied for the job was George Micklewright, who was one of the up and coming really strong councillors in the city. And he'd done an awful lot of work. And I didn't think I was going to get a cat in hell's job of getting that job. And I did. So I think my next talk, if we're all going to go on with this, will be about my years of shelter. But I'm sure that having got trained, it helped me understand the establishment. And I know that there are good people doing their best, but sometimes doing their best costs. And every time we start cutting back on services, especially to people that are vulnerable, then it takes away the chance of them having a really, you achieving what you're aiming at, which is giving them back control on their own lives, a decent roof over their head, and the skills to be able to learn their own living independently and to know their own self-worth. That's often the missing among people that go through the systems that we've set up. Here you are. So now I've got qualifications. Did that ring a bell? Yes, Mary.
Jenny, did you ever go with Tony Benn to the Brighton Festival many decades ago?
I went to conferences in Brighton.
It's only that I met him there and he offered me the use of his diary writer because he'd been talking about the diaries he kept. And I've kept a diary since 1944, still do. And it was a most agreeable, friendly chat. I just wondered if you were there.
So I could have been because I went to Labour Party conferences.
Yeah.
As a delegate. Usually we stayed as a group, the Bristol people. I also attended Quaker socialist meetings at Labour Party conferences run by Ron Hazard. Yes, I've got lots of stuff and I must go back and find it again, and I'm putting it in an envelope and I'm sending it because somebody is collecting the archives from those days. And I've got lots of Ron Hazard's peace movement items. And I hope that he was just a nice man.
Yes.
We used to use the Quaker Meeting House in Brighton for meetings, various
Yes, yeah.
conference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got a head statue in the council offices.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Oh, that was painful because we took years and years and years and everyone talked about it and nobody did it.
Yeah.
And eventually it came about. But it was almost like parts of the city were very reluctant to have it. Yeah. Now, I can tell you stories of Tony Benn. I can tell you about being in the Hartcliffe. In those days, Stockwood stretched as far as Hartcliffe. The dirty trick that the Labour group did was they put all the Tory area into one big ward with a massive vote to shut it up so that they could take all the other bits that they knew they'd win for Labour and have the majority on the city council. So I was canvassing with Tony in Hartcliffe Flats with Francis Easton. And he knocked at a door and I saw him from a side talking to a woman through the letterbox. And then she opened the her door and started talking to him. And she cried in his arms. And it turned out that she was in the multi-story flats, alone, no family. Her only son was either in Canada or America, and she had nobody at all. Tony took the address of the son, and we don't know what he said in that letter, but when we went back, we found out she was getting a letter from her son once a week. And I hope eventually someone put her on a phone so she could actually talk to him. And it was silly things like that that mattered. Well, he wasn't perfect, but an
I
MP who listened, that's a change.
I make the very rash assumption, Jenny, you're still part of the Quaker Socialist group.
No, I'm not actually. Nobody's asked me to join. I'm sending them stuff, but I think someone ought to get. But I'm very, very hard up for money at the moment. I've had a double whammy. First of all, the cat, and all the operations where it got bitten by a rat, and it was losing the sight in this right eye, and had to have antibiotics and put out. And the rat had got it here, as well as biting its face, and it had all gone septic.
Oh dear.
So like a softie, I paid for vet bills, and if anyone knows about vet bills, they're right through the roof. And then I had this tooth that I was having an argument with the National Health dentist about, and so they wanted to take it out. And all National Health dentists through lockdown have been taking teeth out, not repairing any, and I was wanting. So in the end, she said, well, you could go to the private sector. And I said, how much? And I was told £600. And I thought, that's a lot of money. Anyway, to cut a story short, I went to the private sector. They said it was going to be just over 700. And when the bill came out, it was £1,119. I have no savings at the moment. I'm recovering. But the tooth's all right. And I've got away from pain.
Someone mentioned the Tony Benn's diaries. Surprisingly enough, I'm reading one right at this moment.
Ah, right. I did have a conversation with him in Central Methodist Hall too, and I noticed afterwards, I was talking about religion. His mother was a Methodist, a strict one, and the write-up for that and the comments from the media said he was like somebody, a prophet, when he spoke afterwards. And I thought, that's me interfering with him. Having this conversation about religion just before he went on to the main platform.
Can I borrow the book, Ray?
Certainly, certainly.
Okay, when we're unlocked, yes.
Yep,
Thank you.
I will make sure it gets to you, Mary.
Thank you very much indeed.
Would you like to borrow mine? I have them signed.
There you go. Signed ones as well.
Yeah. No, yes, I mean, I didn't think you wanted to know about the politics. I was down at the old, but do you remember they made buses on the Bath Road? And I remember him on the back of a flatbed talking to the workers, and we were walking around giving out leaflets. I also have something that Quakers might want. We arranged for him a Cambridge Quaker meeting, but it was for the Labour Party as well, to actually do a session. I have all the notes on that session because one of the Quaker friends wrote them all down at the time about what he was talking about and what he said. Now when I die, for God's sake, don't let my family have a bonfire outside. You'll find things in this house that will open up bits of history right the way through the city.
Jenny, you ought to write a codicil to your will and say this, that where you want to put these papers.
Well, at the moment, I've just put notes in saying I want to be buried like in the ground. I'm compost and I want to go back.
Yeah, but you're referring to all your precious notes.
Yes. My son, I think, will do that. My son has been encouraging me. I have boxes we can't use the front bedroom because of boxes in there. and
Right.
it's all full of paperwork and notes and things. And when I'm talking to you, I'm actually using some of the paperwork that I've kept.
Aha.
We are talking about me getting some of the memories published. However, I'd rather not be here at the time.
Posthumously.
Yeah.
Yes, but if I could get someone to help me put them together sensibly, that would be sensible. But to raise some money perhaps for some charity somewhere by publishing them. So any that are sold, the money goes back into some pot somewhere to go on with the sort of work that I and you would all like to go on. Yeah. I mean, I've had a strange life. I do think that our Maker's hand is in it somewhere. I mean, sometimes when I know nothing about a subject, something happens and I learn very fast. And it's like fate has been listening and brought the knowledge into me just when I needed it. And when I get into talking about shelter, you're going to find out I knew exactly where to put a contract out to kill people in Bristol. So,
You mentioned George Micklewright. He went on to do very big things within the council and became quite an established name within Bristol City Labour Party.
well, I was a councillor with him, and I was cabinet member. Yes, I respected George. He was a hard worker. Wasn't perfect, but then I also knew all these people eventually, and I knew the ones I could trust and the ones I couldn't trust,
Right.
and the ones that were there for themselves and to polish their own halo, and the ones that really, really did care. And other councillors, because of my training, will come and bring a case to me and ask my advice. What do I do with this one, Jenny? So that what they had was a caseworker and a social worker sitting among them just where you really need it. And to think I think lateral thinking, some people think in boxed thinking and go by the rules. Other people like me break down some barriers and walk through and say, how about putting this together a different way?
Listen, here's something amusing for you. I was quite involved when I was living in Easton. I was quite involved with the Labour Party there, and this was a time when there was no campaigning done by the Labour Party within Easton because they thought they'd won it. They'd constantly won it. There was no bother whatsoever. They didn't need to bother with that until the Liberals got in, because the Labour Party weren't doing any canvassing or anything like that within the part, within Easton. They were taken for granted. So, and if you start feeling you're being taken for granted, look what happens.
Yeah, no, the people want to know that they can talk to you as a human being and to get hold of you. I mean, I've had people from Southmead in this house at Stockwood sitting around the dining room table talking about their problems. I think, I'm trying to think, somewhere's a piece of paper here, something like 17,000 cases I did in Southmead. And all that is in the archives, and I didn't choose them to go into the archives. I was told to hand them all in, and they discovered that they hadn't got rid of them. They were using as a history lesson and I said, well, you take every single address off, you take every name. I don't want anyone to say that was my grandma and granddad and they did naughty things. Don't let the history live on, just leave it as we're not going to allow this to happen again. I'll get round to Southmead. I just put a story out about 2 weeks ago on Facebook, and Rosalie Walker came in with we always thought there was another side of you, Jenny. I was on the police authority and got locked out of somebody got locked out of their car. And I and another member instantly told them how to do it and did it and got the car unlocked. And that was because when I was councillor in Henbury, I got locked out of my car and someone showed me how to get into it. So I'm streetwise, too streetwise. Yeah. I mean, you spend your life trying not to judge people, because I always remember what Gandhi said: unless you walk every step of someone else's life, you do not know why they are what they are. And what my job was to stop some of it, sort it out, and make it not necessary for them to go on doing things like that. Had some fun. Yeah, there you are. No, I'm rambling now. Sorry about this. Right. Wait until I get to Gypsies and Travellers and the New Age Travellers and the Convoy. And I got involved with the squatting movement in Bristol. All the people that no one else wants to get near. But I do think we do something about our penal system. And we are turning out children to just continue it. It's like a machine. And what we've got to do is get those youngsters in environments. Children's homes don't work because you get all the paedophiles coming round to actually try to get them into the sex industry. Yeah.
Jen, did you say your son was going to be hoping to put your memoirs together in a book eventually?
We're trying to find someone to help me who will take all the paperwork and say no, and then say there's a gap there, what happened? I've got every single diary from 1972.
Wow.
I've got all the names of all the people that we had in the classes and everything. All of that's got to be scrubbed. And I've got the casework. Do you remember I talked about 6 weeks with shelter and we did 22 cases? Well, I found that in the attic. All the notes that Hilary did. I've had a conversation on Saturday with Hilary. It was May Day, so we had a chat. And she said, I can put them into the archives, but I am to make sure that nobody can read the names and addresses of any of the cases, so that they're completely neutral in there. And I will say that Hilary Gilmore, who's now called Hilary Saunders, did them. There you are, David. Did you know that we went back that far? No, now you do.
There's an address in London, Jenny, which is appealing for people's diaries so that the staff there can work out social history. Trouble is, I don't remember what it's called.
Yes, but we want it Bristol, don't we? I thought we wanted Bristol to think about its roots and where it came from and what happened. I mean, talking about Old Market, I used to have a member of the Labour Party up here who I talked to, an elderly man, and he was down in Old Market standing beside his father when the Old Market riots went through. Now, nobody talks nowadays about the Old Market riots. And it was about poverty and hunger and bad wages. And I think those bits drift away, and they shouldn't. It's history.
I've never heard of the Old Market riots, Jenny.
Well, he said his dad picked him up and pulled him away quick when it got really out of hand. But they were rioting in the Old Market 1920s, I think.
Oh, my goodness.
But perhaps we ask the history people at the what is it called? Yes. And I mean, I found all the stuff on the founding of the Hindu temple in St. George. All that's now in the archives. I've got one of these minds that thinks that ordinary people are ignored. And it's about time we had some of the ordinary history of ordinary people, not the great and the good all the time.
You get my vote.
Yeah, no, I'm not a politician, really. I was not really cut out to be one. And they tried to kick me out when I came out against the Iraq war, you know. I had to go before a tribunal. And that's why my vote very soundly went for the Labour police commissioner, Labour one, because he was on the panel and he said, no matter what you do to these people, they're like this. And he was referring to me being a Quaker. He said, once they make up their minds, they will not change. And I think he was right. Come on, you must all have bits and pieces. You've all got lives where things have happened. And Christopher, I can't hear you.
Unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself, Christopher.
Yes, apologies for being so late.
Mm-hmm.
I was helping our guest to get a national insurance number, which I think he is now going to get. And as you know, the elections have been going on, so kind of too much happening on a Friday. I felt I really wanted to come along because I myself trained as a social worker. I took the CQSW. I was a social worker specialising in mental health in the London Borough of Merton, and also a night duty social worker, so being called out in emergencies. One of my concerns is that whether you look at the news or whether you look at what's on drama on the television, there's virtually no reference to the role of the social worker working with people who have mental health problems, or young people who may be in trouble with the law. The focus is on the activities of the police, or in some cases the military, but the really valuable contribution that engaged, well-trained and skilled social work can do to reduce the likelihood of offending or reoffending, to reduce, to get the appropriate support for somebody with mental health problems, just doesn't happen. I don't know if you've got a comment on that.
I do think the countryside is calming to people. If I've got a garden, I go and plant things. I go and talk to the flowers, like, you're not doing very well, why not? And I think living in flats and things, a sterile concrete world, deprives people of that. Sorry about the clocks. And it's on time. Anyone else? Right. Well, I think that's enough for today. I know you're going to ask for the next lot.
But of course. What's ever next? We can't go until we've heard the end of it. It's
No,
like
it's
like
going
a
to be a little box somewhere, isn't it? And you're going to stand by it and say, for goodness sake, wake up, Jenny, because we want to know more.
like the story by Dickens. You always have to know more. Anyway, friends, we have reached that time, and he says in letters 12 o'clock. And once again, thank you, Jenny, for an illuminating time we have had together.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny.
And hopefully we'll be meeting again next Friday.